Why do we live in Delhi? I don't understand anymore. We should be soon. The air is so clean, as Aditya was saying. The politics is different. It's a freer atmosphere. So we really have to ask ourselves very seriously why we are not migrating. Like everybody is migrating somewhere, we should also migrate southwards. I think it's high time that it started happening. And very soon, don't worry, we'll be asking for asylum. So you better look for some way of giving us asylum, because I'm not sure how long we are going to be welcome in the northern part of the country. And as from Aditya's talk this morning, I think you might have made out that it's not the situation is increasingly getting more and more difficult. This is such a paradox. The one person everybody can criticize without any cost is Mahatma Gandhi. You try criticizing Ambedkar, see what happens. You know, everybody has some, every political group has some holy cows whom you can't touch. But Mahatma Gandhi is the one person who everybody and anybody can criticize, and rightly so. Why is it so? Because that's what he taught us. That, and it's also what principles he stands for. If you are somebody who stands for non-violence, if you are somebody who stands for dialogue, democracy, freedom, how can you deny others the right to criticize you? So somewhere people also understand. Of course, there's a lot of unfair criticism, there's a lot of motivated criticism. I'm not saying that it's all legitimate, but I think it somewhere proves a point. Followers, even followers, devoted followers of Mahatma Gandhi, cannot become aggressive and attack those who are attacking Gandhi. Why? Because there's something in Gandhiji's teaching which prevents that from happening, isn't it? If you believe in non-violence, if you believe in love and harmony, which were his basic principles of politics, then how can you retaliate? So I think somewhere that tells us something about the man. But let me just extend what Professor said a little bit more, that what we have been witnessing, as in the morning, I think Aditya explained at quite good length about Nehru, it's the same is happening about Mahatma Gandhi, but it's happening in a slightly different way. Now, the reason is that even the most, what shall I say, those whom we know that in their basic ideology, they have no faith in Gandhi's principles. They are no followers of Gandhi's politics. And yet, the stature of Mahatma Gandhi is such that they hesitate to come out openly and criticize him. So, the manner in which the criticism is done is insidious. For example, Sadhvi Pragya, when she was campaigning, and I think soon after that, she actually defeated Digvijay Singh from Bhopal. She made such, I can't even repeat the kind of comments that she made about Gandhiji. And instead of condemning her and saying that we cannot have such a person in the Indian Parliament who uses such language for the father of the nation, even the Prime Minister said, "Oh, I'm so anguished by what she has done, and I will never forgive her in my heart." Which is all very nice, pious, feelings, but you have power. Here is somebody who has the power to punish a person like that. Yeah, I know. I don't even want to use the language they use. I can't say Gute Deshbhakt. It, my tongue twists when I say that. So everybody here knows, because this was a very famous thing that happened. Now tell me, a country, look at all of us, we all tolerated it, no? But even the BJP could not issue her a notice saying, explain your behavior. Just as this Biduri, Ramesh Biduri, you know what's happened in the parliament 3 days back? I'm sure all of you know, no? You know the language he has used against a Muslim MP? Danish Ali, he has used language again which we cannot possibly repeat. We cannot. No. It's such terrible language. We have never heard such language in our lives. And that too in the parliament. Until now, action has not been taken against him. So, you know what's happening increasingly is that your tolerance levels are being raised. First time you hear something, you feel bad and you say, no, no, something like. Next time you hear it, you say, okay, this is the same as what happened. Gradually, you are being made to get used to things which you would earlier feel violated. I mean, when I first heard what that Biduri had said about Danish Ali, I can't tell you what I felt. It was like my whole body was on fire, a revulsion. How can this happen in my country? A member of parliament can use such language against a fellow MP. And that person is not immediately picked up and thrown into some dungeon forever, and banned for life from participating in public. Till now, his case has not even been referred to the Privileges Committee. And today morning, I was reading an interview with Achari, who was the former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha. A very good man, very seasoned, experienced man. And the journalist was asking him, sir, what do you think will happen? He said, well, frankly, I don't think anything's going to happen. He's not going to, BJP, will he be at least banned from the house for the session? Oh, no chance, he says. They will not do it. They may just do a little bit of something to show, but nothing is going to happen. And the journalist said, then what can the other parties do? He said, they can do nothing. I mean, constitutionally speaking, unless the speaker takes it up, Privileges Committee takes a strong stand, the others, I mean, they can of course protest outside, they can protest inside, but legally, constitutionally, procedurally speaking, this man may well get away with this kind of gross violation of every parliamentary norm, every norm of decency that you can possibly think of. And please, I'm saying this not just because I want to talk about this, just try and extrapolate that is the kind of language that many of the followers of this ideology, this way of thinking, do use for Mahatma Gandhi. Let us not fool ourselves. How many of you remember that there was this Hindu Mahasabha leader, a woman leader in Aligarh, who, this was about 2 or 3 years ago, she enacted, and the video was shot and spread, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Can you imagine? It was all, of course, what shall I say, staged, some red liquid, there was a statue and there was a shooting, but what? I mean, can you imagine that this kind of thing can actually go on, and has that person been punished? Is she in jail? There are temples to Godse in Meerut. Actual temples have been made to Godse. And at the level of social media, the kind of vilification that goes on about Mahatma Gandhi. The only thing is, the difference between the two is, Nehru is criticized openly at the highest level of the leadership publicly. Okay, he's held responsible for partition, he's held responsible for China. The Prime Minister has said it, so I'm not saying something which is a state secret. It's there in the video, any video you can see the newspapers and everything. Everything that happens, so it has almost become a joke, as you know. Now it has become a joke. That moment something happens, they say, oh, Jawaharlal Nehru did it. I'm sure Jawaharlal Nehru will be blamed for this. It's kind of now boomeranging back on them because they overdid it so much. But on Gandhi, don't for a moment imagine that just because he is there, his glasses are there on all the dustbins of India. Fantastic. That's the only way we can remember Mahatma Gandhi, right? He stood for cleanliness. So put a poster with his glasses on every dustbin in India. Great. I wonder if any other country remembers the father of their nation like that. You know, to do Swachh Bharat, you need Gandhiji. So this is like Gandhiji wanted cleanliness. Can you tell me who didn't? I mean, this is, as the Americans say, this is like mom and apple pie. Who can oppose a mother and apple pie? Both are very good. They are like national emblems, you know. So it's saying Gandhiji wanted cleanliness. Of course, everybody wants cleanliness. I mean, imagine the only thing we can remember and try to remember about Gandhiji is that he believed in cleanliness. Not even that you're using that to say that he believed in abolition of untouchability. When you say cleanliness, at least tell the story about how he would go and clean the latrines himself. You know, how he taught people that untouchability is something wrong and what we make untouchables do is something reprehensible. You know, tell the story about how he almost threw out his wife because she refused to clean the toilet of an untouchable guest. He almost threw her out of the house in South Africa. It's a big story in his autobiography, he has described it. You know, I mean, it's not even that we've used that, the cleanliness story, to actually talk about some of the revolutionary things which Gandhiji stood for. We don't talk about Gandhiji, what was his position on women. You know, we don't talk about Gandhiji, what he believed on the issue which today I'll be talking about for quite some time. What was his stand on communalism? You know, we only pick up some, as I would say, a very, you know, antiseptic, benign, harmless thing like Safai Andolan, Swachh Bharat. Gandhi becomes a mascot for Swachh Bharat. Of course, my other question is that uh, the other side of the story is that why is even this present regime, whom we know in their heart of hearts what is their relationship with Gandhi, we know their relationship with the Gandhi assassination. We know their relationship with Gandhi's politics even before the assassination. There is documentary evidence upon documentary evidence, any number of what shall I say, quotations that you want from Savarkar, from their newspapers, from everything, which shows what they thought of Gandhi. He used to be called, you know, a banya who was bloodthirsty banya, who was not satisfied with the blood that he had already drunk of Hindus. You know, this is just the months before the assassination when they were building up the anti-Gandhi atmosphere, when Gandhiji was trying his level best to quell the communal violence in India. If you see the newspapers which Godse and his associate used to run, and which Savarkar had financed, you know, and he used to help them out all the time. This is the kind of language you find in them. And in fact, one of the things that clearly written is that Gandhi, go commit suicide. We don't need you. So this is not hidden. It is there in the archives. It is there in books. It is there everywhere. But point is, even they are today not yet reached the point where they can publicly denounce him. Okay, officially, they still feel necessary to kowtow. Prime Minister feels it necessary to take the dignitaries to Sabarmati Ashram and show them khadi and this and that. Claim the Gandhi legacy. Why? We have to ask ourselves that also. What is there in that legacy that is so powerful that even those whom in reality we know have no empathy, no sympathy, no identification with that ideology, and yet are forced to publicly try and appropriate that legacy? What is the power of that politics, which even his opponents find it necessary to try and pretend at least that he is a great icon. So those are some of the questions which I'm going to be trying to address today with you. So this is how I pose the question, that what is it about brand Gandhi that casts its spell on all, high and low? Government advertisements are incomplete without his glasses. Bharat cannot be made Swachh without his help. He surfaces in popular cinema as a friendly advisor to Munna Bhai. You've all seen Munna Bhai? And in serious biopics by Benegal and Attenborough, right? Great filmmakers have made films on him. Pamphlets written by Gene Sharp. I don't know if you've heard the name. Gene Sharp is an American scholar who has devoted his whole life to the study of Gandhian methods of struggle, non-violent methods of struggle. He set up a center in the US where he propagates this, he studies it, spreads the message. So, pamphlets written by Gene Sharp, an American scholar who has spent a lifetime analyzing Gandhian methods of non-violent struggle, were distributed in thousands and read avidly by, by those who were at the barricades in the Arab Spring in Cairo. I'm taking you back to 2013, I think, if I've got the date right, when there was this whole Arab Spring, right? When people in their thousands for days on end sat in the public square in Cairo, because it was an example of non-violent resistance. And you know what they were doing? They were actually sitting there and reading these pamphlets in which Gene Sharp tells you how do you conduct non-violent struggle. So, on the streets of Cairo, Gandhi was alive in the hands of people who are actually fighting the battles on the street, revolutionary battles. So he remains, my whole point is, he remains relevant in so many kinds of ways. So many different kinds of people find him so important. So, what is it about him that makes all this? I could give you many more examples. What is the image of Mahatma Gandhi that is a very powerful image that people have in their mind when they think of Mahatma Gandhi? I'll give you an example, a quotation from Jawaharlal Nehru, which is one of my favorites, which in my mind sums up Mahatma Gandhi. I quote, "Many pictures rise in my mind of this man whose eyes were often full of laughter and yet were pools of infinite sadness. But the picture that is dominant and most significant is as I saw him marching, staff in hand, to Dundee on the Salt March in 1930. Here was the pilgrim on his quest of truth, quiet, peaceful, determined, and fearless, who would continue that quiet pilgrimage regardless of consequences." This is also an image that if you saw the Gandhi movie, Attenborough's, then it's something, but this is an iconic image of Gandhi leading the band of Satyagrahis in the Dandi March. In many ways, that the essence of Gandhi comes out in that image. So I'll just take you through a brief survey of how Gandhi, what was Gandhi's real intervention in politics, just so that we can then start the analysis. So the opening chapter of the story of Gandhi's political life begins with the struggle of Indian immigrants, mostly poor indentured laborers. Remember that, in South Africa in 1893. How old was he then? When was he born? 69, 1869. So how old is he? 24. He's only 24 years old. Try and remember that. Keep that in mind when you listen to the story. So this 24-year young man on his first job, taken to South Africa, and he begins his political life then. And he tried a variety of methods of protest, which eventually culminated in the adoption of mass civil disobedience or satyagraha at a mass meeting that was held at the Empire Theatre in Johannesburg on the 11th of September or 9/11, 1906. Right? So from 1893 to 1906, a period of 13 years, he starts out as a young man who starts writing letters to the newspaper, protesting about some discrimination, this, that, and the other. And as he says in his autobiography, he said, "I became a leader because there was no one else. I had no qualities of a leader. You know the story of when he first time he stood up in the court to argue in Bombay. He got so nervous, he sat down. When he got the first time he got up to give a speech in the Indian National Congress when he was visiting from South Africa. Again, he got so nervous, he just stopped and sat down. So it was not like he was a natural orator, like a born brilliant orator and all. Nothing like that. Here is somebody who, through diligent hard work, bit by bit by bit by bit, through that resolution and application of responding honestly to the circumstances that were before him, you know, built this politics that he ultimately, of course, this doesn't mean that he didn't have great qualities in him, but what I'm saying is it was not like he came from some big political background. He was like Firosha Mehta or someone, one of those early moderate leaders who made big speeches in the Imperial Legislative Assembly and all that. Gandhi's politics emerges from a very, very different scenario. The simple thing was, how did he emerge as a representative of the Indians? He was the first educated Indian who went to South Africa. Till then, there were only two classes over there: indentured labor, who used to work in the plantations and mines, and the traders. It was a Gujarati trader who took him there as his employee to fight a case for him. So he was the first barrister, British educated, English educated, Western educated, who understood constitutional principles, who knew the English language, who could talk back to the governors who were administrators in their own language, who could claim rights because he knew that there were rights under the British law. So nobody else knew that. So he became, as they say, accidental leader. I think it's very important to remember these things because it's all very inspiring also. That what do you need to become a leader? It's not that you need, as I said, great wealth, some, great quality. Speaker, Gandhi, have you ever heard a speech by Gandhi? Have you ever heard a recording? Even by the end of his life, I mean, if you listen to him, you can barely understand even what he's saying because by then he was old. He has lost his teeth. So his speech was not that distinct. He had a very distinct Gujarati accent. He never became an orator or a great speaker, but read his speeches, which he gave when, he was arrested in 1922 and he spoke before the British judge who was punishing him, saying that I don't want any concession, you give me the maximum punishment that you can. It's a long, brilliant speech. He wrote brilliantly, but he was no great orator. So if you think that you need to be a great orator to be the leader of millions, think again. So all your stereotypical images of Gandhi somewhere, I think, Gandhi shakes those. He questions those, Nehru in many ways is much more fits into this. You could say he had a social background which was wealthy. His father was a great lawyer. He went from childhood almost, he studied in England, and all that, and he had the gift of the gab and, whatnot. He was much more of an orator. But Gandhiji was never an orator. And yet, who could question him in his leadership? He was the one who was revered. He was the one who was followed, not anybody else. The masses of India chose him. So what, again, when you're thinking, when sometimes you think of a leader now also, and you say, no, this person will never become a great leader. Why? Because it is not a good speaker. People appreciate something else. It's some other quality of leadership that people respond to, not just rhetoric. Today, somebody may be, swaying the masses, often in the wrong direction. That doesn't make that person a great leader. Somebody else, quieter, but resolute, ultimately can win over the affections of people. So Gandhi is a very good example of how not to have a stereotypical idea of leadership in your mind. That by the time he came to India, as he said, he may not have been that well known, but he was known in many circles for the work which he had done in South Africa, and he returned to India in 1915, all right, after having spent something like 22 years in South Africa. So by the time he comes back, he is now about 45, 46 years old. So again, that's something you have to keep in mind, because interestingly, he says this when people ask him when he comes back and he's going around, and Gokhale tells him, you should just roam around, travel in India for 1 year before you make up your mind what role you want to play. What star are you going to be with the moderates? Are you going to be with the extremists? Are you going to be with Tilak? Are you going to be, Gokhale, of course, was dead by then in 1915. But what is going to be your politics over here? You make up your mind slowly after having studied the whole situation. But at that time, he says something very interesting. He's asked by someone that what is going to be your role? So he said, do remember that at this stage in my life, I can only join an organization to influence it and not to be influenced by it. He's so sure of himself and his method that by now he knows he has something new to offer. And that's what that new is, what I'm going to be talking about, the Satyagraha principle. He knows it. Leadership also means you have to have a conviction in your own self. Because only if you're convinced inside you can you communicate that to others. No? So he was very clear. He said, at this stage in my life, I can only join an organization to influence it. Then he also says, that doesn't mean I've closed my mind. If some particularly dazzling light comes from somewhere, of course I will welcome it. So this complexity, that he's not arrogant, but confident. He's very sure that he has something new and different to offer. And just look at the way in a matter of a year and a half, he after all comes out into politics only with Champaran movement in 1917. And that's a small movement in one part of India. Where is Champaran? Bihar. Where in Bihar? Border of Bihar with Nepal. So it's one little corner of Bihar, right? Then Ahmedabad, he leads a workers' strike against the local mill owners. Many of the mill owners are his close friends and people who fund his ashram. And yet he leads a movement against them. So he's obviously a very different kind of man. And the sister of the main mill owner against whom he is leading the workers in strike comes and joins the strikers. These are the Sarabhais, of whom Vikram Sarabhai was one of the descendants. Vikram Sarabhai, the founder of ISRO, whose name you've heard recently a lot because of Chandrayaan. He started the whole space program in India. These are his family. So Ambalal Sarabhai was the Seth who actually came and rescued Gandhiji's ashram in 1915 when he ran out of money. Why? Because he had taken in an untouchable family into the ashram, and the donors, who were otherwise, local Gujarati businessmen and all, who used to give him some money, said, sorry, you can't have an untouchable family living in the ashram. So he said, okay, I'll close down the ashram, but I'm not going to turn out the untouchable family, because that's against my principles. And they were virtually on their last legs. They had no money. And then suddenly, from somewhere, some donor quietly came and left some few thousand rupees. And later it was found out that it was Ambalal Sarabhai. And this is the man against whom he leads a strike 2 years later. Him and other mill owners, because the workers' cause, he's convinced. So he's a very strange man, he is. He's not a conventional leader at all. And he still continues to win the respect of even Ambalal Sarabhai, despite struggling against him, because he does it in a manner which doesn't attack Ambalal Sarabhai, doesn't call him names, doesn't say you're a great exploiter. He says, but we are fighting for our rights, and we are right and you're wrong, and you must give in. And I said, Ambalal Sarabhai's sister, Anasuya Sarabhai, comes and joins the strikers. That is the fascinating part. The other is then the next generation, Mridula Sarabhai, the daughter of the family. She then joins Gandhiji later, which is a few years later, and becomes one of his very, very powerful lieutenants. She played a great role during the partition, violence in the recovery of women from Pakistan. She was one of the people Gandhiji trusted. Anyway, that's a different story. The point I'm making here is that within the matter of 2 or 3 years, there are these small movements, and only in the Rowlatt Satyagraha in 1919 does he come on the national stage, right, where he takes up a national level issue. And here it's quite amazing. What is the national level issue he takes up? There is a new legislation which the British are bringing in. The war has just ended. There were two acts called the Rowlatt Acts. Rowlatt because Rowlatt had written those acts. But they were basically acts which suppressed civil liberties. And they were meant, it was something like our UAPA, okay, just to give you an idea. Correct? People could be put behind bars without any warning, without any reason. It was meant to be a curb. The ostensible reason was curbing terrorist activities, as all governments always say. That these are meant to curb terrorist activities, but then they are all used against all and sundry. So Gandhiji said we must protest against these acts. The British have promised us great things after the end of the war, and we are getting this. So he's a nobody. He's not a leader of the Congress. He's not president. He's not even a working committee member. He's nobody. But he gives a call and everybody responds. And within a matter of 2 weeks, he's able to organize an all India movement through a Satyagraha Sabha which is set up. So that is what is amazing. He is able to judge the popular mood that people want to protest. People are angry with what they have suffered during the war. People are expecting a generous treatment from the British because the British have been making all time of wartime promises. The moment war is over, we'll give you new concessions, we'll give you new constitution, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. Instead, they are now, as he said, we ask for bread, you're giving stones. Right? And so out of almost nowhere, he's able to build up a movement. And this is the movement, by the way, in which the Jallianwala Bagh incident takes place. Not non-cooperation movement, that is 1 year later. So 13th of April in Punjab, where this movement became very powerful because again, predictably, Punjab had suffered a lot. During the war, it had sent millions of its people as soldiers into the war, and families had suffered. There had been high prices, all kinds of economic and social issues were also there. Influenza epidemic had been there, just like your COVID. 100 years back, there was a similar epidemic where millions of people died all over the world. This was 1918, 1919. So there was a discontent in the air, and he could judge that. And he gave a leadership without any organizational basis. And he got this tremendous response, where existing political groups and parties, they flocked to him because he gave leadership. What was the difference between them and him? He asked for action. Something to do, a protest. It wasn't something very important. He said there'll be a hartal. All over India, there will be a hartal. That means shops will be down like a bandh, what we today call a bandh. There'll be no economic activity, people don't go out of the streets, people should stay in their homes, they should fast, they should pray, and this and that and the other. But it's a protest, a public protest against these acts. It's not a petition. We'll not just hold meetings where we'll say this is wrong, but people will show their anger by taking some action, right? And this is how he came into prominence as an All India leader. And then, of course, the next year, the non-cooperative, Jallianwala Bagh happened, and the non-cooperation movement. And as Aditya, I heard, was mentioning to you, that what was very interesting was that he gave a call for the non-cooperation movement, partly in response to the Khilafat issue, but I'm not going to go into the details of that. But what is very interesting is that a special session of the Congress was called in September 1920 to discuss the proposal for non-cooperation. Because it meant people giving up schools, colleges, law courts, titles, everybody was asked to non-cooperate with the government. If you were a student, you stopped going to school, a government school. So if you were a college student, you stopped going to college. If you're a lawyer, you stopped going to the law court. If you're a litigant, you stopped going to the court. Everybody, if you had title, you sacrificed you gave up your title. So everybody was asked to boycott the government in different kinds of ways. So Congress leadership was very confused and not very sure that this was the right way to go. There were different opinions in the Congress. And here is this literally an outsider who's come, you see. Try and remember, I mean, he came from South Africa. There were established leaders here. Tilak had just died 1st of August 1920. So in a sense, a vacuum also emerged at the popular mass level. And what is fascinating is that he comes to the Congress and he puts forward this proposal for non-cooperation, which Khilafat Committee has already accepted that they will do. And it is open, in an open session, voting is held for that. And majority comes with Gandhi of the delegates. So leadership, many were reluctant, but the ordinary delegates who had come from all over India, elected by their different provincial associations and all that, they were for it. So it gets carried. Okay. And what is very interesting is that the movement was, and let's say there was something like 1200 people for it and 800 against it. So it wasn't as if overwhelming majority also. Some of the most prominent leadership was against it. C.R. Das was against it, for example. Lajpat Rai was against it. Partly because they felt that this boycott, Lajpat Rai felt boycott of education institutions not a good idea. Because they had struggled for many years to set up educational institutions, the whole DAV college network. So they felt that all this would get, affected. C.R. Das felt that boycotting of elections was not a good idea. Boycott was also of elections which were coming, the new elections. So there was a lot of, debate. But within 3 months, at the regular session of the Congress in Nagpur, entire leadership comes to his side. Why? Because on the ground, people responded to the call for non-cooperation. See, so even those leaders who were initially reluctant, thinking that this was not a good idea, people will not be able to respond, and when they saw the popular response, the way students started giving up, the way, college students gave up, lawyers gave up, one by other, people are, giving up titles, this, that, and the other. The entire Congress went over to him, and even leaders who had opposed him, in 3 months' time, they said, we are all for you. We are all with you, and we accept you as the leader. This was again a fascinating thing. Today, what do you see? Half the time the trouble is over who will have the leadership, no? You are familiar with rivalries at the level of leadership. They will prevent a unity even when it isn't good for the country, good for the province or whatever it is, because there are rivalries, people want this, people want that. Here is a situation in which when the older leadership happily sacrifice and give up their leadership except this man who has just come from South Africa, who has not been an established leader in India as their leader, because they all somewhere understand that he is bringing something new. And something at the popular level, he is able to reach the people of India in a manner that nobody had been able to do it till then. So that is the point which, I want to sort of explain to you as to what is this. I'll give you one quotation to give you a clue as to, to this man. Gokhale. Gokhale was very close to him. Gokhale went to South Africa also. Gopal Krishna Gokhale was one of the leaders of the moderates. He was a brilliant man, died very young. And Gandhiji used to call Gokhale his political guru. Okay. Gokhale said of Gandhi, without doubt he is made of the stuff of which heroes and martyrs are made. Very interesting formulation. One leader, much senior, I mean not in age but in terms of what I said, India, probably they were the same age, but Gokhale was a very established leader in India. It was said of Gokhale that, he was a member of the Imperial Legislative Council. And every year when the budget was presented by the finance member in the Imperial Legislative Council, Gokhale would get up to critique it. He would do a speech on the finance members' budget speech. And people used to wait for his speech rather than the finance members, the budget speech. And next day, the newspapers would start with Gokhale's criticism of the finance member's speech. Such was his stature. He had no power. He was not a member of the executive council or something. He was just like an elected MP. That's all. And yet, such was his intellectual power and the respect which he enjoyed, including within British officialdom. They really looked up to him. So, this is the man who said of Gandhiji that he is without doubt made of the stuff of which heroes and martyrs are made. But he went one step ahead. And that gives us a clue to Gandhi. He said he has in him the marvelous spiritual power to turn ordinary men around him into heroes and martyrs. That is the quality that we have to understand what was Gandhi. He could turn the poor agricultural, untouchable laborer of India into a hero and a martyr. That's what Gokhale is telling you. He has that capacity. So what is the secret of that capacity? What did he do? What was his message? Which is what we have to try and understand. So it was his success in devising the method which he named Satyagraha. So I'm going to use that word. And that's what I call the method of turning ordinary people into heroes and martyrs. It is this which gave him the ability to decisively influence the history of India and indeed of the world. For Gandhiji, the heart and soul of Satyagraha was resistance. Resistance against every kind of injustice. Resistance against discrimination. Resistance against oppression. Satyagraha encompassed a vast array of forms of struggle. The methods could range from non-cooperation, which I just described to you, which included returning titles and awards, boycotting schools, colleges. It included picketing foreign cloth and liquor shops. It included civil disobedience. So beginning with non-cooperation is it's not breaking a law. You're withdrawing cooperation. There's no law which says you have to cooperate with the government. But civil disobedience is when you're breaking a law. So Satyagraha could include from non-cooperation to entire spectrum, the end of which was civil disobedience or breaking of the law. And civil disobedience could take the form of non-payment of taxes. It could take the form of breaking oppressive laws by selling banned literature on the street. It could take the form of making salt, because salt was a protected monopoly of the British. It could take the form of defying Section 144, which is when the government imposes Section 140, which says there can be no gathering of more than 5 people. That we still have that Section 144. And mind you, Delhi is now permanently under Section 144. Nobody can hold a meeting anywhere. And you ask for permission and no permission is ever given for any protest movement. So this legacy of British we are continuing very well. So civil disobedience could include these. So the entire range, and there's much more which I can talk about, which we'll talk about. All this was bounded by the limits set by non-violence. The Gandhian method of Satyagraha had an enormous range of activity encompassed within it, but there was a limit, a boundary. You could do all these things and others, but the limit was within the boundary of non-violence. You are not allowed to do any of these things violently, using violence, harming another human being, or even aggressively harming property. You could burn your own clothes, but that is an act of violence. But you were not allowed to go and attack someone or their property. Satyagraha then, for Gandhiji, was not an abstract philosophical concept. I'm saying this because many scholars have gone into the philosophical sides of it. Where did it come from? What did it originate from? The Jain tradition, what this, I'm not going into that. And I'm saying whatever may be the origins, but for him, it didn't stop at being an abstract philosophical concept because he was a political man. He's a practical man. But it is a weapon. For him, it's a weapon that forged in the flame of struggle and sharpened on the whetstone of hard political practice. The word literally means satyagrah, to stick to the truth or insist on the truth. The heart and soul of satyagraha is, however, resistance, as I just said, and it means sticking to your truth about a range of things. It could be that you want to stick to your truth because you believe that racism is wrong. You believe patriarchy is wrong. You believe caste oppression is wrong. So satyagraha means sticking to that truth no matter what happens through various kinds of forms of resistance. And Gandhiji chose satyagraha, the word, partly because he did not like the quietist sound of the word passive in passive resistance. Because many people say satyagraha is just another word for passive resistance, which is partly true. But he did not want to use the word passive because he wanted that the word should have a slightly aggressive tone to it, a more positive statement rather than a passive resistance. All right. So that's why he didn't use the word passive resistance, though there is a lot of similarity between the concept of passive resistance and what he called satyagraha. Another thing, why did he like this word satyagraha, sticking to the truth? Because he was positing truth against sticking to the law. Because civil disobedience means defying the law. So you are pitting truth against law. I'm breaking the law. Why? Because I'm sticking to my own truth. I'm firm on the truth which I have reached. And if that means breaking the law, I will break the law. So the justification, try and understand, the moral justification for breaking a law was in that I am sticking to the truth, my truth. So if my truth is that I must now defy the British, so I will break a law if that is what is required. I will come to a little bit more on this whole legality business a little later. Now, the other thing which I want to say is that this notion of satyagraha which he developed is a very complex notion. And it's a very complex strategy of militant struggle, of which non-violence is only one part. We often, when we talk of Gandhi, only say non-violence. But non-violence, as I just said, is a limit. It's not a method. All right. Suppose I say to you, follow non-violent method. You say, okay, fine, I'll remain non-violent. That doesn't mean you just sit there on the sofa. You're non-violent, no? But how are you resisting? Sitting there doing nothing, right? So your limit is of non-violence, but within that you have to do something, no? All right. So non-violence is only a part of that complex strategy. It is like the Lakshman Rekha within which you operate. But what is the actual method which you follow? Okay. And here what I want to convey to you is that this method of struggle is devised on the basis of a deep understanding of the nature of the modern state, of the capacity of the people to struggle, of the appropriateness of different forms of struggle at different points of time, of when to launch and when to withdraw a struggle. There are many things which I have said in this, which I will explain as I go along. And as I already said, that it has a broad range. And some of the other things which I may like to mention within that range, khadi comes within the notion of resistance. Spinning of yarn, I'll explain to you why. Boycott and burning of foreign cloth and all the other things which I mentioned. And also with it comes going on a hartal or going on a fast unto death that Gandhiji so many times did. All that is encapsulated within the notion of satyagraha. So satyagraha is not just one thing. It's an overarching concept which includes and has space for creativity also. You can use the word satyagraha today, for example, and have completely new and different kinds of methods which are more suited to your situation, because the basic concept is this: sticking to the truth within limits of non-violence. So it enabled people at that time also, and it enables people later. Like, I believe that in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was formed, once South Africa was liberated from white control, apartheid was abolished, and here was a country which had a history of black versus white, white versus black, oppression, discrimination, alienation, and they wanted to now live together. So the solution they came to through very Gandhian methods was to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people would come and openly talk about what had been done to them, rather than go to a law court. And the perpetrators, the oppressors would be there. They would have to listen to the story. And often at the end of it, they would apologize. And to those to whom it had happened would accept the apology and say, okay, now we move on to a new future. To me, that is a Gandhian method of satyagraha, because it has all the principles of satyagraha. It has truth in it. The truth is that the truth is told by the victim in front of the oppressor. All right? It's a non-violent struggle. It fits in with the basic concepts of love and harmony and promoting harmony between different sections of society rather than increasing the conflict, which is the Gandhian method. So I'm that was quickly an example that came to mind. So I thought I'll just share it with you before I go forward. Gandhiji's basic weapon for the empowerment of the people, the masses, was the participation of the people in their millions in political action. So this is the other next aspect of his method, that his method doesn't succeed without mass participation. It does not succeed if only one, that can only for some special thing like going on fast or something, can also be an individual. But for most of the different examples that I have given, mass action is necessary. So this method requires involvement of the common people, the masses, in politics. So it is an empowering method. Try and understand what I'm saying. The method itself is politically empowering because it cannot succeed without the participation of the people. And he believed that if the masses were politically active, they could secure any goal that they desired. When he was asked, how long will it take us to get Swaraj? He said Swaraj in 1 year, right? In non-cooperation movement. What did he mean? He said if the people are ready, we can get it in 1 year. So his whole point was that if people get involved, if they make up their mind, nothing can stop them. No government can stand before an empowered people. If the common people come together and if everybody or majority of people are convinced of something, they can get Swaraj in 1 year. Because that was what his method was. It was to empower people in their millions. For him, therefore, non-violence was important not only as a moral value, and I want to emphasize it, but because it enabled and necessitated the participation of the people. A non-violent movement could only be successful if it had mass participation. And mass participation could only be secured if the movement was non-violent. That is the Gandhian dialectic, as I like to call it. I'll give you an example from Gandhiji himself. When he was about to start on the Salt March, on the 10th of March 1930, a crowd, he started on the 12th of March, so this is 2 days before. A crowd had come to the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, a lot of excitement, some new movement is going to start, so people started collecting. So he addresses them, and what does he say? He explains to them how non-violence enabled the widest possible participation of the masses in the following words. and how it put the government in a very tight spot. I quote Gandhiji himself: though the battle is about to begin in a couple of days, how is it that you can come here so fearlessly? I do not think any one of you would be here if you had to face rifle shots or bombs. But you have come here, but you have no fear of rifle shots or bombs. Why? Supposing I had announced that I was going to launch a violent campaign, not necessarily with men armed with rifles, but even with sticks or stones, do you think the government would have let me free till now? Can you show me an example in history, be it in England, America, or Russia, where the state has tolerated violent defense of authority for a single day? These are all Gandhiji's words. They are there in his collected works, you can check them. But here you know that the government is puzzled and perplexed. They don't know what to do. Further explaining the power of non-violent mass civil disobedience, he said, I quote again, supposing 10 persons in each of the 700,000 villages in India came forward to manufacture salt and to disobey the Salt Act, what do you think this government can do? Even the worst autocrat you can imagine would not dare to blow regiments of peaceful civil resistors out of a cannon's mouth. That 10 people is all we need in each village. What can this government do? If only you will bestir yourself just a little, he says. Do a little bit. I assure you we should be able to tire this government out. Listen to the language. Tire this government out in a very short time. They won't know what to do. I will share with you now from Jawaharlal Nehru a very similar understanding of the Gandhian method. You know, if you want to understand Gandhi, I have a shortcut. Read Nehru. He is one of the most acute observers of Gandhi, and in his autobiography, in his Discovery of India, you will get gems about Gandhi. I am reading you a passage from Jawaharlal Nehru's autobiography. This is the chapter on the non-cooperation movement, 1920-22, which was the first mass movement, I am reminding you again. Jawaharlal Nehru describing what happened after Gandhi gave the call, and people, this is the first time peasants and common people are joining the Indian national movement. I am quoting him. As our morale grew, that of the government went down. See the connection between what Gandhiji had said. What Gandhiji's quotation I gave you is of 10 years later. Nehru's, which I am telling you, he's describing the event of 10 years earlier, though he's writing this in 1934. Okay? But the events being described are of 10 years earlier in 1920. As our morale grew, that of the government went down. They did not understand what was happening. It seemed that the old world they knew in India was toppling down. There was a new aggressive spirit abroad and self-reliance and fearlessness. And the great prop of British rule in India, prestige, it's prestige on which the British lived in India, was visibly wilting. Repression in a small way only strengthened the movement, and the government hesitated for long before it would take action against the big leaders. It did not know what the consequences might be. Government didn't understand this new method of non-violent struggle, of mass struggle. They didn't know what to do. This great British government, which had put down 1857 violent rebellion. Don't forget, this same government, faced with a non-violent movement, doesn't know what to do. They didn't know what the consequences would be. Would the Indian army be reliable? Would the police carry out orders? As Lord Reading, the Viceroy, said in December 1921, I'm all quoting Nehru, they were, I quote, puzzled and perplexed. He uses the same words which I read out from Gandhiji. Gandhiji was obviously repeating what Reading had said. Nehru uses the same phrase. They are puzzled and perplexed. An interesting circular was sent confidentially by the UP government to the district officers in the summer of 1921, which was later published in a newspaper, which stated with sorrow, listen to this, that the initiative was always with the enemy. They are lamenting, meaning the Congress. And this was an unfortunate state of affairs. Always we are responding to what the Congress is doing. Imagine the great British government having to say this. Various methods were then suggested to regain the initiative, among them being the ludicrous ones of starting Aman Sabhas. These were loyalist kind of associations of zamindars and all that. The nerves of many a British official began to give way. The strain was great. There was this ever growing opposition and spirit of defiance which overshadowed official India like a vast monsoon cloud. And yet, because of its peaceful methods, it offered no handle, no grip, no opportunity for forcible suppression. If you can understand what I'm trying to explain in the earlier passage, which from Gandhi, and this passage from Jawaharlal Nehru, you will understand what is the Gandhian method of struggle, of why non-violent method, but with mass participation, with defiance, why does it work? This is what Gandhiji is explaining, this is what Nehru is explaining. Gandhiji demonstrated in movement after movement how non-violent satyagraha worked by placing the government in a no-win situation. It immobilized the government by locking it in an irresolvable dilemma. If it did not suppress a movement that brazenly defied its laws, its administrative authority would be seen to be undermined and its control would be shown to be weak. But if it suppressed it, it would be seen as a brutal anti-people administration that used violence on non-violent agitators. In either case, it was the government that suffered a blow to its prestige and the movement which witnessed a swelling of its ranks. So, what is a successful strategy? Is one in which your opponent has no answer. If he ignores you, he loses. If he suppresses you, even then, and that is the beauty of the Gandhian method, that the British government had no answer to it. But as I told you in the beginning, it was also based on an understanding of the colonial state, of the modern state, which I don't have time to go into all that, otherwise already much time has passed. Jawaharlal Nehru, in his famous presidential address to the Lahore Congress in 1929, where he declared complete independence to be the goal of the Congress, expressed the deep connection between non-violence and mass participation in the following words. I quote, "Any great movement for liberation today must necessarily be a mass movement. And mass movements must essentially be peaceful, except in times of organized revolt. And if the principal movement is a peaceful one, contemporaneous attempts at sporadic violence can only distract attention and weaken it." And very interestingly, Bhagat Singh, writing at the same time, a little later, after Jawaharlal Nehru's speech has come out and all that, says almost in identical words, says the same thing. Before his death, the kind of line that he was taking, because he had already rejected individual violence, he said, "I'm not going to say sorry, apologize, because it will give a bad message to the people that I'm doing it out of cowardice. But I don't anymore believe in this individual violence." And he was started to agree with this theory that mass movements must necessarily remain non-violent. Another thing I want to tell you, that giving a call, this because I'm trying to explain to you different aspects of the Gandhian leadership and method. See, Satyagraha or all these movements were also based, you must remember, and it's very important today for people in politics and those around them to understand this. They were based on intense preparation and mobilization and extensive mass contact programs. It was not that you gave the call and then, everybody just came because the Gandhian charisma, Gandhi gave the call, he was like a Pied Piper and masses just came as if he was, playing a bean or something like that. Let me give you concrete example how it was done. Gandhiji himself toured the length and breadth of the country incessantly in his third-class railway carriage, as well as by car, by bullock cart, and on foot. Other leaders followed in his footsteps. For example, the Satyagraha of 1930, the movement, civil disobedience of 1930, which was initiated with the Dandi March, was preceded by incessant touring by Gandhiji himself. And I'm now giving you what all he did. After his release from jail in 1924, in 1922 he was put in jail. 1924 he was released because he fell very ill. He had to have an appendicitis operation. So though he had a 6-year term, he was released after 2 years. So from 1924, he had, by the beginning of 1929, in these 5 years, he had toured Kathiawar, central provinces, which is now called Madhya Pradesh, Bengal, Malabar, Travancore, Bihar, UP, Kutch, Assam, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Orissa, many of them not once but twice. Gandhiji himself, who was the top leader of the movement. Okay? In 1929, when he was already 60 years old, he toured Sindh. He then went to Burma via Delhi and Calcutta. From April, and you know they had to go by ship to Rangoon. From April, he undertook a 6-week tour of Andhra Pradesh, in which he visited, you'll be shocked, 319 villages in 6 weeks' time. And what were the roads then? What was the transport available? 1929 I'm talking about. Just think of the physical effort that these people put into mobilizing this movement. It was not some magic wand, as I said, you sit there and say non-violence, satyagraha, and people come running. You have to go, you have to talk, you have to explain. It's a multiplicity of things, you know. So today also when you're talking of resistance or movement and all, at least you should know what real movements in this country were. That's why I'm taking time to give you information which sounds like such detailed information. What's the point of this? But I think we need to understand that detail also to understand the larger picture. After those 319 villages, he also visited Almora in the hills of UP. In June and September, he toured the plains of UP. He then went to Lahore for the annual session of the Congress, where complete independence was declared as the goal, and civil disobedience or satyagraha was announced as a means to achieve that goal. The significance of these mass contact tours was explained by Gandhiji in these words. Again, look at the simplicity of the man. I quote, he says, "I travel because I fancy the masses want to meet me. I certainly want to meet them. I deliver my simple message to them in a few words, and they and I are satisfied. It penetrates the mass mind slowly but surely." You know, there's profundity in this 3 sentences if only you think about it a few times. You know, the relationship between a leader and the masses. All what I told you earlier, it's not about oratory, it's not about being grand and, you know, dramatic and changing your clothes every few hours. You know, the man never changed, or he changed his clothes, but he only wore the same langot, at best a dhoti, and if it was cold, a shawl. So there was no excitement about what dress is he going to wear today. You know, we'll go and see what he's wearing. So that certainly was not what was attracting people. To press home his point, Gandhiji even ceased to be an ordinary 4-anna member of the Congress from 1934. Such was his confidence in his own place in the affections of the people and his ability to feel the pulse of the people that when he found the Congress reluctant to go in for a phase of mass struggle in 1942, he warned them that he would go out of the Congress and out of the sands of the country create a movement larger than the Congress itself. Point I'm making is about leadership and the self-confidence. When he was convinced that what he thought was right He went ahead and stuck to it no matter what anybody else thought or did. And slowly people came around to it and found that he was right. Like in 1942, again, I don't have the time, but almost nobody agreed to the Quit India movement in the beginning. Everybody said no. All the leaders said no. This is not the right time. This is not the right time. But Gandhiji said no. I can hear the people. They want to express. They are angry, they are unhappy, they are discontented. We have to give them an opportunity. And look at the power of the Quit India movement. You know anything about it? I mean, it was a huge rebellion that took place. He obviously understood that there is pent up discontent and anger which has to be given an expression. So he disagreed with everyone and ultimately got everyone around to his point of view. That was the amazing quality of leadership, and that comes when you have your ear to the ground. And I don't have again time to explain the methods, but Gandhiji was open to everybody. Anybody could go to his ashram, or when he was touring, to his prayer, what were called prayer meetings, daily prayer meetings. But as I won't have time to tell you, but his prayer meetings could be attended by 2 lakh people, 3 lakh people. They were still prayer meetings, and they could be attended by 10 people, 50 people, 30 people. But every day he met people. Every day he was doing a public, darbar, he never called it, but reception, what politicians nowadays call darbar. But he was open. Letters, thousands of letters came to him, and he replied to each one of them. Often replying in Young India or in Harijan, publicly replying to letters. Each one he replied to. The most ordinary person could walk into his ashram or wherever he was. I can't even begin to talk about the sacrifices of the man. 1930, do you people know this even? That when he left the Sabarmati ashram in 1930, he said, I'm not going to come back here till India is independent. He abandoned a place that had been his only home since he came from South Africa. Alright? He's a Gujarati, don't forget. His wife spoke mostly only Gujarati. She didn't know English. She knew very little Hindi. So he's in jail till 1932. Then he's released in 1932 from civil disobedience movement. And what does he do? He goes on an anti-untouchability march. Alright? For 9 months continuously. He never goes back to any home. He doesn't have a home. He has no home from 1932. Think about it. I mean, everybody needs a home, right? You want to go back. Imagine if you don't have a home. You're always on the road. You're out. You have said, I'm never going to go back there. Then he says, I will now make a new place for myself in the heart of India. And what does he choose? Wardha. God-forsaken place. There is no road going there. He said, I want to go where the poorest of Indians live, where there is no road. And if you read about the description when they reach over there and he starts living, there is nothing. People have to walk through mud to reach over there. I have a description of Acharya Kriplani and Jawaharlal Nehru walking back from a working committee meeting in Wardha to the Wardha town or some place where they were staying. And some car had come to take people but forgot to take them. So they had no way, so they started walking and they were knee deep in mud. And this is where Gandhiji lived for the rest of his life, in this Wardha. And his wife also, he didn't even let her come for 1 year after he had settled down. What is she going to do over there? She can't survive in this place. So he was without his family, even his wife, for so many years when he was out of jail. So it has so many aspects, so many different. So trying to understand is a complex, exercise. It's not something simple. It's not given to simple generalizations or whatever. But we can also never forget that he was martyred to the cause of secularism. The Hindutva brigade, which planned the conspiracy, and the assassin who gunned him down, believed that he was the chief obstacle to the setting up of a Hindu Rashtra after partition. That's why they got rid of him. And they were right. From October 1946, when communal violence began to spread in India, started in August, the Great Calcutta killings, August 1946. October, it started spreading on a mass level in Bihar and in Bengal. Gandhiji devoted all his energies to the taming of the communal monster. He first went to Noakhali, where he spent 4 months in the remote villages. Aditya already in the morning talked to you a bit about that, so I'm going to not take up time on that. But that was, I think, one of Gandhiji's most heroic phases of his life, where I mean, he showed what can I call it, inhuman courage. I mean, obviously, it was beyond human expectation what we saw from him there. But from Noakhali, he went to Bihar, where there had been large-scale communal violence by Hindus being the aggressors on the Muslims over there. Noakhali Muslims were aggressors on the Hindus. He then went to Calcutta, then he came to Delhi, and he was on call everywhere as what the name which Mountbatten had given him as a one-man boundary force. Lord Mountbatten said at one point, he said that what our armies are not being able to do, that is prevent the communal violence, which started especially with the transfer of populations, Gandhiji is doing. He called him a one-man boundary force. You probably do know the story of Calcutta, that how Suravardi requested him that Gandhiji, you please be in Calcutta on 15th August when the division of India takes place. Calcutta will be in India. There are a lot of Muslims here in Calcutta, and he feared that there will be a reprisal for the August 46 violence. And to ensure the safety of the Muslims, you be here. And this is Suravardi is a Muslim League guy. He was not listening to Gandhiji when Gandhiji was appealing to him in Noakhali. Same person who now appeals to Gandhiji for help to save the lives of the Muslims. Gandhiji says, all right, one condition, you and I will live together. We'll sleep together in the same house in Calcutta. So they find a house in a congested Muslim-dominated locality and they move in over there. And then he walks in the streets of Calcutta, 14th, 15th August, hand in hand with Suravardi. And do you know, not a single incident of violence took place in Calcutta. Not a single incident of violence. 15 days later, some violence starts to break out in different parts. And then Gandhiji goes on a fast in Calcutta and says, I will go on a fast until I am assured that all this is going to end. And then after 3 or 4 days, everybody comes and begs and, pleads and says, we will not do this, we will not do that, etc., etc. So he gives up his fast. And then he comes to Delhi, where in the meantime, terrible communal riots take place in Delhi in the first week of September 1947. Some accounts say 2,000 people died, some accounts say 5,000 people died. Refugees who had come in, Hindu and a lot of Sikhs from Punjab who had come into Delhi, they were in a very angry, frustrated mood, having been thrown out of their homes. So, and RSS and such organizations were very active on the ground. So, large-scale communal violence broke out. Muslims were driven out of the city. They had to be kept in camps out in the outskirts of the city. Another matter that Nehru government was right there and they suppressed the violence very quickly, and within a month people were able to come back to their houses and there was peace. But that's when Nehru appealed to Gandhi, said, please come, we need you here. So after having saved Calcutta, Gandhi comes to Delhi, and here he again plays a fantastic role. But then he stays on in Delhi till, of course, he is assassinated, because the situation in Delhi was getting very bad. What finally led to his assassination situation was, and then finally he goes on a fast on the 13th of January again, just 18 days before he's finally assassinated. And then for 4 or 5 days he's on a fast, till again people come and All the organizations promise, pledge that they will not indulge in acts of violence, and then he gives up his fast. So, this period of Gandhiji's life, where it's not just what he thought, which I will tell you, but his actions, the role which they performed in actually keeping India, sane, in preventing India from becoming a Hindu Rashtra, which is what people were actually trying to do. But let me just give you one or two examples of Gandhiji, the way in which he saw the whole issue. As early as 1931, Gandhiji had said in Young India, it has been said that Indian Swaraj will be the rule of the majority community, that is the Hindus. There could be no greater mistake than that. If it were to be true, I for one would refuse to call it Swaraj and would fight it with all the strength at my command. For to me, Hind Swaraj is the rule of all people. It's the rule of justice. Again, when he gave the call for Quit India in 1942, he said, I quote, Free India will be no Hindu Raj. It will be Indian Raj based not on the majority of any religious sect or community, but on the representatives of the whole people without distinction of religion. Further, in the same speech, he says, those Hindus, see, he's very direct, those Hindus who, like Dr. Munje and Sri Savarkar, see the names he's taken. Munje is one of the biggest leaders of Hindu Mahasabha, and so is Savarkar. Those Hindus who, like Dr. Munje and Sri Savarkar, believe in the doctrine of the sword. He also knows these are all believers in violence. Those who believe in the doctrine of the sword may seek to keep the Muslims under Hindu domination. I do not represent that section. I represent the Congress. You want to kill the Congress, which is the goose that lays golden eggs? If you distrust the Congress, you may rest assured that there is to be perpetual war between Hindus and Muslims, and the country will be doomed to continuous warfare and bloodshed. But congressmen, he says, will sacrifice their lives in order to protect the Musliman against the Hindus' attack and vice versa. It is a part of their creed. It is one of the essentials of non-violence. He's crystal clear in what he thinks is Swaraj, in what he thinks India has to be. In November 1947, when the clamour for Hindu Rashtra was very loud, again he said, I quote, the state was bound to be wholly secular, and the state of our conception must be a secular democratic state. People who say that he believed in using religion, he believed in, Sanatan Dharma and this, that, and the other, they should look at the very clear-cut statements he's making August 1947, at the height of the partition carnage that's taking place. Again, he says, at the same time, he says, if a minority in India, minority on the score of its religious profession, was made to feel small on that account, he could only say that this India was not the India of his dreams. I could give you many more examples. I don't think it's necessary. His life and martyrdom continue to inspire and empower those who are striving towards the India and the world of his dreams. His martyrdom at the hands of a Hindu communalist was the pinnacle of self-sacrifice and had a cathartic effect on the whole nation, which had been ravaged by sectarian strife, but which came to an abrupt halt with his death. Many of those who had indulged in communal violence or even thought about it, sympathized with it, they began to feel guilt and remorse and held themselves responsible for the tragedy. In his death, he gave a new lease of life to the newborn nation. I was recently reading a book that has come out on Gandhi's assassin. The title is Gandhi's Assassin. It's a whole study of Godse, from his very early childhood to his hanging. A detailed study, it's been done. A very fine journalist called Dhiren Jha. And one very interesting thing which he says, which I'll leave you with, that Godse was convinced that when he kills Gandhi and the news goes out, he will get a lot of popular support. Because he thought all these refugees, who have been the victims of partition, they have had to leave their homes, and those people, they felt that they were getting the support on the ground, from among a big section of the Hindus, that they will come out in his support. And that will be his vindication, because he knew he was going to die. Because after all, he had killed him point blank. So he's going to be caught and hanged. There was no doubt about that. So what was he looking for? He was looking for a hero. He wanted to become a big hero to the Hindus. But when in jail, he learned that there was no outpouring of support for him at all. Not even who were otherwise sympathizers supported. Because, as I was just said, even those who had started having a sympathy, except for hardcore elements, they felt a sense of revulsion. They felt they had participated in something very bad and dirty. They had participated in the murder of this greatest man of India, even by thinking, on communal lines. So the result was, for 10 years in India, 10 long years, when from August till January, we had minimum 500,000 people who were killed. Some people say 1 million. For 10 years, the day Gandhiji died, from the next day, for 10 years, there's not a single incident of communal violence in this country. 10 years later in Jamshedpur, Chutka Futka starts, then another 10, 5, 6 years later here, there, and by 80s, we know what happens. Babri Masjid, this, that, and the other. I'm not going into that story. But what more can a man do for you? Even with his death, he gave you a lease of life for 10 long years or more to build on, an opportunity to recover, to even begin to understand. And I'm not saying greatness, but even to begin to understand the truth or the reality of a person like that, a leader like that, is, first of all, we need humility, is what I would say. I'm not saying give up critical faculties. Please use all your critical faculties. But at least first acknowledge what the contribution is. Try understand it. Not just read criticisms, from here, there and the other, which you should do. But you should also try to understand what actually he was. Right? After that, sure, everybody has faults, everybody makes mistakes, nobody is God. I don't believe anyway in God, so I can say anybody is God. So, but I think this is something I want to communicate to you, that as historians, when you are confronted with, when you come across phenomena which are larger than life, revolutionary periods of history, the French Revolution, American Revolution, Chinese Revolution, revolutionary periods, Buddhism, the rise of great religions, those are also revolutionary periods in history. You have to expand your minds. Try, and I think if you try to understand Buddha using tools of, what was he trying to get out of it, I'm sorry, you won't understand, no? Isn't it? You have to expand your own mind and your own horizons and think of that people can be motivated in ways very different from what maybe you and I today are motivated by. Then only greatness comes. Let's not bring down all greatness to our own mundane levels and try to understand it in crass terms. Gandhi was a bania who was trying to, keep, he was a casteist, he was this. I mean, that is not the level at which even a critique should take place. A critique also has to be sophisticated. Sure, disagree with him, agree with Ambedkar, I don't care. But first try to understand, do you even know what Gandhiji did on the caste issue? Why do you imagine he did nothing? First, at least read one book of his anti-untouchability campaign of the 9-month march which he did. And so many other things which he did. What about all the Vaikom Satyagrahas and this and that and the other? Critique, but at least know first what happened. So I will just leave you with that.